Well, there's quite a lot happening in that short video, but I'm not going to ask you questions on it. Well, Joseph lived in the land of Canaan with 10 half-brothers, 1 full brother, and at least 1 half-sister. He was Rachel's firstborn and Jacob's 11th. Was the first of the 2 sons of Jacob and Rachel, making him Jacob's 12th named child and 11th son, but also Jacob's favorite. When we first encountered Joseph, he is 17, and he has dreams of future domination. Joseph has a special ability to interpret dreams for which he becomes known. Yet, Joseph had to wait 22 years and face a number of challenges before the destiny that was promised him in Egypt. And remember that he enjoyed that for 71 years before he died at the age of 110. God keeps his promises, but we must be patient, for God works in his own timeline, no one else's, for he is God. Joseph is a very able administrator, and despite the many challenges that he faces over the 14 chapters, as I say in the Bible, that tell his story, he is totally unwavering in his faith in God. The plan here is to look at the many challenges that he was presented with over his long life to the age of 110. In the beginning of the story, he is seen as a spoilt child, with everything that he could possibly want being simply given to him. Not surprisingly, his brothers are extremely jealous of him. Brothers often have difficult relationships with one another, but his brothers are really half-brothers. And the text tells us that Joseph is a very clearly favored son, and this lies at the root of his brothers' hatred of him, as is further illustrated by his long, multicolored coat, which would have made him stand out prominently anywhere, and provided a further target for the hatred of his brothers towards him. He was indeed greatly favored by his wealthy father, and this was obvious in that he was better dressed than any of them. Personable, young, good-looking, he proved a natural and easy target of hatred for them. And yet God is working on his future plans through Joseph. Joseph's story explains the Israeli presence in Egypt. Joseph's particular strength is in interpreting dreams. When Joseph was 17, he shared with his brothers 2 dreams he had in the first dream. As we saw in the video clip, Joseph and his brothers gathered sheaves of grain, and those gathered by his brothers bowed to those of Joseph. In the second dream, the sun, which represents the father, the moon, which represents the mother, and 11 stars, which represent the brothers, bowed to Joseph himself. This implied Joseph was supreme over all, and this angered his brothers and made his brothers plot his demise. Most of them plotted to kill him, except Reuben, who suggested that they throw him into an empty cistern, whereupon Reuben, who suggested that they would go back later, he would go back later and rescue him. However, the brothers happened to spot a passing camel caravan carrying spices and perfumes to Egypt, and they sold Joseph as a slave to those merchants. The brothers then painted goat's blood on Joseph's coat and showed it to their father Jacob, who then believed his son to be dead. Joseph was then sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, and became his servant and subsequently superintendent of his household. Potiphar's wife, Zuleika, tried to seduce Joseph, as we heard in the video, but he spurned her as it went against his ethical, moral, and religious principles. And so, an angered Zuleika made a false accusation of rape, so he would be imprisoned. According to the Midrash, an ancient Jewish commentary and part of the Jewish scriptures attached to the biblical text, Joseph, according to the Midrash, would have been immediately executed because of the sexual assault charge against him by Potiphar's wife. But she had accused other servants of the same crime in the past. Potiphar did not believe the charge made against Joseph and asked for Joseph's life to be spared. In prison, Joseph was soon put in charge of other prisoners, including Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker. Both these men had dreams, and Joseph asked to hear them. The cupbearer's dream was about a vine with 3 branches that was budding and would then produce grapes. The cupbearer then took these grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph interpreted the dream as the cupbearer being restored as cupbearer to the Pharaoh within 3 days. The baker's dream was about 3 baskets full of bread for the Pharaoh, and birds were eating the bread out of these baskets. Joseph interpreted the dream as the baker being hanged within 3 days and having his flesh eaten by birds. Joseph requested that the cupbearer mention him to Pharaoh to secure his release from prison. But the cupbearer, once reinstalled in office, forgot about Joseph. 2 years later, the Pharaoh dreamt of 7 lean cows, which devoured 7 fat cows, and of 7 withered ears of grain, which devoured 7 fat ears. No one could make sense of this dream. At this point, the cupbearer remembered Joseph, who was then summoned. Joseph interpreted the dream as being 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine, and advised the Pharaoh to store surplus grain. Joseph was appointed vizier, the second in command to the Pharaoh, and was given Asenath to be his wife. During the 7 years of plenty, surplus grain was stored. When the famine arrived, it was severe. And so people from surrounding nations came to Egypt to buy bread. People sold their properties and entered into slavery and came to Joseph to buy seed. Joseph sold the grain on the condition that 1/5 of the produce should go to the Pharaoh. In the 2nd year of the famine, Joseph's half-brothers were sent to Egypt to buy goods. They came before the vizier, but did not recognize him as their brother Joseph. He did not speak to them in his native Hebrew and accused them of being spies. Joseph placed his brothers in prison for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he demanded that their younger brother Benjamin, who was Joseph's full brother, be brought before him to prove that they were speaking the truth. They knew the wrong that they had done to Joseph. He was listening to their conversation in Hebrew. Joseph loaded their donkeys with grain, returned the money that they had paid and placed it in their money sacks as they returned to Canaan. Next, we have the silver cup. On the return home, the brothers discover that there was still money in the money bags, and they then informed their father that the vizier had demanded Benjamin be brought before them to demonstrate that they were honest men. Jacob is seriously distressed and told them to return to Egypt. They were brought to Joseph's house and they tell him what had happened, when he then produces their brother Simeon. He then offers them full hospitality. They have brought gifts for the vizier, Joseph. A meal is served. And note how Egyptians do not dine with Hebrews at the same table. So they're served at a separate table. Joseph now orders the steward to put Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's sack to test his brothers. The following morning, the brothers journey back to Canaan. Joseph orders the steward to go after them and question them about the missing silver cup. The steward catches up with them and finds the silver cup. The brothers agree to be escorted back to Egypt. Joseph demands that the person who had the cup in his bag now becomes his slave. His half-brother Judah offers himself instead of Benjamin and appeals to the vizier for Benjamin to be released. And the vizier breaks down in tears. He sends the Egyptians present out of the house and then reveals to the Hebrews that he is their brother. This produces much weeping. Joseph then commands them to return and bring their father and his entire household into Egypt to live in the province of Goshen. For there are 5 more years of famine. Joseph supplies Egyptian transport wagons, new garments, silver money, and 20 additional donkeys carrying provisions for the journey. 20 years have passed since Joseph last saw his father. They embrace and weep together. Afterwards, they meet the Pharaoh, who has a very high regard for Joseph. The family settle in Goshen. Joseph's father was 147 years old and bedridden with poor eyesight, and pleaded not to be buried in Egypt, but with his forefathers in the land of Canaan. When Israel died, he was mourned for 70 days and embalmed, which took 40 days, and then a ceremonial journey. Joseph's brothers had feared retribution for Joseph's delivery into Egypt as a slave, but received forgiveness. Joseph saw his great-grandchildren. He made them swear that when they left the land of Egypt, they would take his bones with them. When the Hebrews left during the Exodus, Moses took Joseph's bones with them. Joseph lived to 110, living to see his great-grandchildren. In the Midrash, a rabbinic textual interpretation which I mentioned before, the selling of Joseph was part of God's divine plan for him to save his tribes. The favoritism Israel showed Joseph and the plot against him by his brothers were divine means to get him into Egypt. It is said that Joseph was sold 5 times. First, his brothers sold him to the Ishmaelites. Then the Ishmaelites sold him to the Midianite traders. the Midianite traders to the Medanites, and the Medanites to Egyptians, and the Egyptians to Potiphar. Joseph is clearly seen as a stalwart, a leader, the founder of the tribe of Joseph, and a man of strong, unswerving faith in God. And it's from this that we have the tribes of Israel. Now, before we move to the next hymn, which is "It Is Well With My Soul," I wanted just to give you a few words of background here, because often you come across a hymn and there's a powerful story behind it, and there's a powerful story behind this particular one. This hymn arose from a great family tragedy that befell Horatio Spafford, a loyal friend and supporter of the evangelist D.L. Moody, who you might have heard of before. Spafford was born in New York, an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and a wealthy senior lawyer in Chicago who had invested heavily in property. Buildings in Chicago were then timber framed, but in 1871, fire spread throughout the downtown core of Chicago. 300 lives were lost. 100,000 people were made homeless, and property valued at $200 million was destroyed in the Great Fire of Chicago. Spafford lost all his property assets, including his law practice. In the same year, his son, aged 4, died of scarlet fever. In 1873, he decided to move his family to England to join D.L. Moody. Due to business commitments, Spafford was unable to accompany his family, but he would travel the following week. His wife, Anna, and their 4 daughters then sailed on the luxurious French ship Fille du Havre, daughter of Le Havre. But 1 week into the crossing, it collided with a Scottish ship with an iron hull and sank in 12 minutes. 226 lives were lost. His wife sent a telegram, "Survived alone, what shall I do?" Spafford sailed the following week. The captain of the ship that he was on had worked out the precise location where his family had perished, and the ship stopped. It was there, looking at that stretch of water, that Spafford felt a sense of closure. He wrote to friends, "It is well with my soul." This hymn was inspired by what was before him at this very moment. The music was composed later by his friend Ira Sankey. His wife, who survived him by many years, wrote that at some point she would find an explanation for what had happened to her family, but that would be in heaven. So I hope you find these words helpful as we now turn to the hymn, "It Is Well